Hey, we're here with Julian Bhebhe, who has an amazing creation called 4 Years in a Cave, which documents a painful real-life experience of an elementary school teacher who survives a brutal, barbaric, and tribally charged military purge of the 1980s in Zimbabwe. So we are going to find out from Julian about his ordeal, about his story, about these hiding and escaping in a remote cave for 4 years, and about the agreement to unite some parties, and just what this led to, and what kind of lessons and insights we can get from it. So, Julian, glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
And thank you for being here. And so, you have this 4 Years in a Cave documentary. You went through the story. Can you tell us in your own words just what happened? What is this all about?
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, Robert. This is a story about an elementary school teacher. I know an elementary school teacher I've interacted with, a teacher who went through this difficult moment in his life, who was picked up one day and accused of feeding guys who were against the government. And he was taken away from his family, from work, then from his family to some torture site where he endured unbearable, excruciating torture, which left him almost dead. He was unconscious. But then the soldiers decided to go and play, relax by playing soccer. And then he regained his consciousness. And when he realized that he was naked and he had clothes close by, he decided to put on his clothes, and courage just built up in him, and he decided to flee. And then found his way to a cave far away from the torture site. And he stayed there for 4 years like an animal. And then at some point, the warring factions, the parties that were fighting, the ruling party and the opposition party, decided to come together, negotiate a truce. And in that truce, one of the conditions was to allow people like this teacher that we're talking about to return home and maybe even go back to his work place of employment. And then at the same time, the soldiers were allowed to go back to their camps. And then these other guys who were causing problems, what they call the dissidents, were also given amnesty to assemble at certain points and forgiven as if nothing ever happened.
Wow. And so, what led to the elementary school being picked up? Was it just some randomness, or like why did they take him in the first place?
Right. The thrust of the story is that there is tribal conflict here. There are two tribes that seem to be wrestling for power. The majority tribe takes over the government. This is after Zimbabwe used to be Rhodesia, and it was under the British. And then in 1980, after some war, after a long Bush war, the British, the government that was leading Rhodesia, and these guerrilla movements, the two parties that we're talking about here, all got together, negotiated a truce, which led to the independence of the country in 1980. Okay, so when elections were held, because everything in that country was tribal, the tribe that had the majority of supporters won and led the government. And then the minority tribe, which had an army just like the majority tribe, became the opposition party. Now there was a tussle, there was a fight between the ruling party, made up of the majority tribe, and the minority tribe, which also had arms. Right. So the Rhodesian army, the Rhodesian government, these two guerrilla movements, and the British government decided to get together, and then there was this agreement, as I indicated earlier on. Okay, so they had to find a way to bring all the fighters together. The fighters from the majority tribe, the fighters from the minority tribe, and the Rhodesian forces themselves. So they had to come together, integrate, and form one national army. But in the process of the integration, there were bad things that started happening. The guys from the majority tribe started frustrating the former guerrillas from the minority side. And those from the minority tribe were so frustrated that they decided to abscond with arms. So they went out to the communities, stayed out there and started forcing people to cook for them and so on. And then the government, which had the majority tribe or the majority of the soldiers, started pursuing these guys who were out there causing problems, roaming, demanding food from people, and doing all kinds of horrible things that you can think of. All right. So then, during the pursuit of these guys who had absconded the army, the soldiers then came after anyone who supported, who was accused of having interacted with the dissidents from the minority tribe. So anybody could just go to the soldiers and tell a story that, oh, so-and-so fed the dissidents last night, and the soldiers would pounce on that person, take him away, torture him, kill him, or do anything they wanted. So that's what happened to this teacher. Somebody in the community decided to snitch on him and just tell lies to the soldiers. The soldiers didn't care. They went to pick him up from his work, then went to his home, and from there they took him to the torture place, and that's where he was lucky to regain consciousness and escape, to go and live in a cave for 4 years.
That seems terrifying just hearing about it, right? With all of this turmoil and all this bad human behavior. And what's this man's name? Is his name Z?
That's Z. That's his name.
Okay. And so, like, I'm sure that with all this, everything that happened, right? Z was unjustly taken, tortured, escaped, living in the cave, and then returning. And so what sort of just insights about human nature and brutality and cruelness, like what sort of lessons did Z pick up from all of this?
Right. First thing that he tells me is that he realized that if you're doing well in the community, don't assume that everybody likes you. There are some people who are envious of you and they won't tell you. So, and he was basing it on the fact that someone in the community had given wrong information to the soldiers, because he says he never saw the dissidents. He never fed the dissidents. Therefore, the accusation that was made against him was all false and mischievous. Right. So the lesson number one is that people will do crazy things to you if they envy you. And so he ended up suffering for something that he didn't do. And next, he goes to the torture camp and he finds that the soldiers are perhaps as young as his own sons. And these boys do all kinds of barbaric things on other human beings. They strip people naked, they attach electric lines to private parts and they torture them. They do all. These are little young men who are doing this to a man who is old enough to be their father. So the lesson that he picks up from there is that when young people are misguided, they can do horrible things and forget that there will be consequences later. Because right now, here we are talking about this matter. If the international community gets this story, there needs to be a follow-up. And one time or the other, some of these boys will have to account for what they did to people who had done nothing to them. So that's the second lesson that Z talks about. And the other thing is that when you're faced with a difficult situation as he experienced, where you're forced to live in a cave, you have to be strong. He says there's power within you that comes up and it tells you to persevere. And then he talks about faith. He says the biggest problem we make as human beings sometimes is that we label our faith in terms of denominations and that kind of thing. But he says there's this one power that he discovered when he was in the cave, this power that was present there all the time. And if he kept his mind on it and stopped worrying about what the soldiers had done to him and whoever sold him out and all that, if he focused on that power, he would find peace. And this is what kept him sane for those 4 years. And when he got out of the cave, he returned to his employment and worked like any other human being.
Wonderful. And this is great because when bad things happen and then they get resolved, then you want it to have meaning, right? You want it to help others,
Yeah.
and then the rest of us hopefully don't have to go through something this extreme, right? But you hear about this extreme situation, and then you extract the lessons, and then maybe you can apply it to your own life. And so these are some good lessons so far, right? There's the lesson that this whole envy concept, that sometimes you do things well and you work hard and you succeed in life, and then someone does something mean to you and you think, well, what did I do? And many times it's not about you, right? It's that the other person had the envy of you and they kept it secret, and maybe they sought revenge or said or did something mean, or it expressed itself in that way. And that's just a good thing to think about, that about how we need to persevere anyway, and that we just be a little bit on the defensive about those people that sometimes will want to tear us down, because that is the shortcut, that is the easy way. And then you're saying that there's this lesson that, especially with young children, there's sometimes they don't know what they're doing, right? They're brought up in a certain way and told to do things, and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. So that's helpful to think about, being getting on the right path or back on the path if we've kind of fallen on our way. And you hear about like teenage gang members or young kids that get into crime and things like that, and it's just so easy to just go astray in that way. And then you also have this helpful lesson about the higher power, so to speak, right? That there's this thing that's always there to give you the strength when you need it to combat some of these problems. And when you are living in a cave, I imagine that there's just constant problems, right? Just trying to survive, trying to find food, dealing with isolation. So can you tell us, since you mentioned a little bit, gave us a tease about that greater power, like what did Z go through trying to live in that cave? Like even surviving in a cave for 1 week sounds impossible. How do you live in a cave for 4 years?
That's the point, Robert. And that is the purpose of, that is the whole reason why this book is out. We want to talk about those kind of things. So Z says, it was difficult to start with, but he had no choice, because he knew that if he got out, the soldiers would come after him. Remember, he ran away from the torture site. He ran away from these guys who wanted to kill him. So when they discovered that he had escaped, they were mad. They were really upset. And they did everything they could to go after him, to find him, but they couldn't. Right. So he finds a way into the cave. And in this cave, he discovers this presence, this higher power. And he says that's what kept him alive. When he went into the cave, he didn't even have any food. He only had fruit that he picked up along the way on his way to the cave. And that's what he survived on for a number of days, maybe a week or two, and survived. And then when the food ran out, he realized that he had to find other ways to survive. He had to find other ways of sustenance. And so he kept on maintaining this relationship with the higher power. And he says he prayed. That's what he told me. He says he prayed and asked for guidance on what to do next and where to go to find sustenance. And one time, prompting came, and he remembered a man who he knew lived in the area. And that guy was a distant relative of his. So in his mind, because he had been communing with the higher power silently in the cave, he felt that was the direction from this higher power to a source of food. And so towards the end of the day, because he was trying to avoid contact with other human beings, he didn't want to be seen lest he be recaptured and skinned alive. So he waited until it was almost dark and headed to that man's home. And that guy, strangely, welcomed him. And that's the man who kept him alive. That's the man who made sure that his life in the cave was almost close to normal. He's the one who provided him with not only food every night, but also provided blankets and checked on him and made sure that Z was doing okay. And to crown it all, this man, Joe, as his name is in the book, Joe was a traditional leader, a man who was very spiritual. He, in his community, he was a leader in his community, and he knew how to pray, even pray for rain and stuff like that. So when Z comes to him and he narrates his ordeal, Joe is excited that the deity is in charge. And because he's a traditional healer himself, and he's in constant communion with the deity, he even suggests that they go to a major shrine, what they call Njelele. They go to the shrine together. And Joe sincerely believes that if they go over there and present Z's case to the deity in the shrine, then Z will certainly be protected in his cave, and he will his life would be spared. The soldiers will not even find him until normalcy returns.
Very nice. And there are more good lessons here, right? There's this idea that you should find a way to ask for help. Like there's doing what you can and doing the deep thinking and introspecting, but even something as simple as getting food and surviving, I mean, sometimes you need to ask for help. And then there's the other side of the lesson there of don't be afraid to provide help to someone that needs it. And so this is wonderful. Then they went to the shrine and spoke to the deity and got the protection, so to speak. And so tell us about some of these like cultural and spiritual practices, because I know that this Njili shrine that you mentioned is a significant part of this book. So just what are the kind of religious practices and customs for this?
Right. The Ndebele believe in a deity that lives out in the Matogo Mountains there. It's all written in the book, chapter 5. So Z finds himself in a cave. And the Ndebeles believe that the deity also resides. The Njelele shrine itself is like a cave, a big one. Strange, very significant in its own way. So there is a connection between the cave that Z finds himself hiding in, and the main shrine where the deity resides. So, one of the practices that the Ndebelés observe or conduct is after the death of an adult, 1 year after the death of an adult, the family must perform some rituals to help the departed soul go to wherever human beings come from. They believe that when you die, your soul departs from the body, and it's only the body that is left here, and we commit it to the ground. But the spirit goes somewhere. So within that 1 year, they believe that the spirit is still close by. So when they perform this ritual, it sort of releases the spirit to go ahead back to its maker, to its creator. And once that is done, then there is order in the family. So the interpretation of this situation was that perhaps he went through the kind of problems, he was facing the kind of problems he was facing because there was some spirit that was upset, unsettled. And so they had to perform these rituals. And that was one of the reasons why Joe suggested that they go to the Njilele shrine to perform this ritual. And they did. And when they got there, they had a number of things to do, like the book describes the practice. They report themselves, tell the deity who they are directly. There is somebody who goes, the mediator, who goes between the deity and the living, Joe and Z in this case. And then they mention those people, the ancestors who were departed and that kind of thing. And then they perform rituals such as spilling alcohol to the ground. There is a cloth that they lean on, and then whoever has a problem like Z in this case, laid out what his problems were, cried out for help, and asked for protection from these soldiers who were out to get him. And at the end of it, they were convinced, especially when the mediator told them what the deity was saying. And they left convinced that everything was going to be fine. But I must emphasize that the mediator emphasized to Z that anything, whatever happened to him after their visit to the shrine, would depend entirely on his judgment. If he made right decisions, he would be safe. But if he rushed, if he was impulsive, if he didn't think properly, just rushed into taking action, he would find himself running into problems. And we see in the book there as well, in some chapters, we describe some of the dangers that he put himself in when he was impulsive, when he did not pay attention to what he was told at the shrine, when he just rushed to action. He tried to go and see his wife, ran into problems. He was almost caught. He visited Joe at some point when he felt very lonely. You don't expect a human being to stay in the cave forever. There were times when there was this desire in him as a human being to connect with other human beings. So he would at some point, he decided to go to see Job. And while he was there, problems started. The soldiers came. Luckily, they did not come to the homestead. They were only at the field, which was a few meters away from the house. And then when he visited his wife, the soldiers actually came, looking for him and looking for the dissidents that we mentioned earlier on. But luckily, the wife had locked him up in a guest room. The soldiers almost kicked it open, but they decided to listen to the wife, who said, no, that I keep that little guest house locked because from time to time I visit the city, and there's so much to do, so I haven't gotten to it. I'll open it when I get to it sometime. They understood that. But you could tell from the way the conversation was going that one of them was moved close to the door and could have kicked the door open, and that would have been trouble for him. Once again, he says he remembered that everything he did, his safety would depend on his sense of judgment.
This is an interesting idea as we all navigate our own decisions, right? And we all deal with this balance of your destiny and your free will. You think about, well, my greater power wants the best for me, but there's also room for me to screw up. And in a similar way, how if you have a child and you say, well, I'll do what I can for my child, but they still might mess up and make their own decisions. So a similar sort of relationship, right? With you as an adult and your child, and then you as an adult with your deity and your higher power. And life really is just a series of decisions and problems. And even after all this, my understanding is that Z then had difficulty and frustration and resentment applying for his pension. So can you tell us about just what happened even afterwards?
Yes. So the warring functions, the ruling party and the opposition finally decide to negotiate, and they arrive at an agreement. And one of the terms is that people like Z should return home and maybe even go back to their jobs, so employment. Yes, and that happens. So Z finally goes to the school where he used to work, or where he last worked before his capture. And then the headmaster there, the head of the school, he advises him to go to the district office and report himself and present himself and ask for a reinstatement to his employment. And that all works out. He gets back to his job, and he starts contributing his pension towards his pension. So, but then at the end of his employment, I mean, he's a grown man, and he works for a few years, and then retirement has to come. So he applies for his pension. And that's when twists and turns come to him again. So the trauma comes back. He was accused of a crime he did not commit. He was almost killed at the torture site. He lived in a cave for 4 years like an animal. And he knew that the soldiers would kill him if whenever they got him. So now he's applying for his pension. That is rightfully his. But then he receives a note from the pension department, which asks for further information. They want him to explain why there was a gap in his employment between the time he was captured and the time he was released to go back home. They realized that he must have been somewhere. So they ask him, where were you? So he responds to them and tells them, look, I ran into problems. I was picked up, and somehow I managed to escape. Pension department, it's as if the pension department is looking for that. They say, okay, you ran away from the soldiers? You should have been killed. You ran away? So that's why there's a gap between 1983 and 1987? Okay. So if you really need your money, come over to the capital city and explain your case. And he knows no doubt that they will bring the security guys, the police, and call it FBI, whatever it is. Law enforcement will come, try to investigate him, and he might find himself arrested again. So he decides to forego his pension. Just let it go. And he says he'd rather die. After all, he managed to live for 4 years without any money. So what would kill him at this time is especially after buying cattle, goat, and so on. He would survive on those things and till the land, produce food, rather than risk getting arrested again when he goes to explain what happened to him, something that he did not plan. So Z fails to get his pension. And to this day, his pension is still held by the pension department. And so one of his cries, especially for platforms such as this, Robert, the world needs to know that these things are happening to other human beings. And if the international community could just intervene and help Z get his pension, and maybe other people who are not talking, there could be some people like him. He says he suspects that there are other people who could be facing, who probably face something worse than his, but who are not talking. But once the world knows and there's some intervention of some kind, then perhaps Z and others could have their problems addressed. He could get his pension. He could get some rehabilitation. He could get some, counseling so that he recovers from this trauma that he's battling with, which he knows other people are also facing. After all, some people were taken from families, had their hands tied to their backs, thrown into shafts, mine shafts, old mine shafts, alive, to die in there. Some were shot and buried in shallow graves. So families are suffering. Families are traumatized. And Z hopes that this pension thing of his perhaps might bring sanity even to the leaders so that they bring closure to this matter.
And that is a great first step to get some awareness about some of these injustices, to get some sunlight on the problem for many different reasons, right? Because first, the direct obvious one is that he has been frustrated for decades now dealing with this issue. So the first step is to just get some of the information out there. But you're also saying that there's some secondary benefits to communicating this, right? That others can be motivated, inspired to deal with their own, maybe even bigger issues.
Mhm.
And then even the rest of us can pick up some other like interesting stories and tidbits and insights along the way. And so this is just, it's awkward and scary to hear about these events, but it's necessary for us to find out about them. And we also want to know a little bit about Z's mental and emotional well-being, right? Because
Yes.
he has gone through a lot, but he also like survived a lot, and he pulled in from some of these things that you mentioned, like the higher power and the making good decisions. And so what sorts of insights do you have as far as like maintaining hope, sense of normalcy, those sorts of things?
Yes. Joe, Z's friend, is not bound, is not confined to the cave like Z. He has his home. He knows what is going on out there in the community and in the country at large. So whenever he brings Z food at night, that becomes an opportunity for Z to get a picture of what's going on out there in the world. So Joe tells him about the massacres that are still going on, the stories that he hears. He informs him about just how people are doing, these negotiations that were taking place. So he keeps giving him hope that things will be okay, because it looks like the government, the ruling elite, and the opposition are talking. And they are praying that they will arrive at some kind of agreement. So Joe comes into the cave every night and he brings hope to Z. He tells him about things that Z reflects on when Joe has departed. He brings him food. He brings him water to drink. He offers his time just to talk to him, ask him how he's doing, hear what his dreams are. Of course, allow him to vent out the frustration, the anger, the pain, and all that. So, in a way, Joe's visits are therapeutic to Z because it allows him to let out the pain, the fear, the suffering that he's going through, the trauma that he's dealing with inside him. So whenever Z brings food during these meal times, that's an opportunity for Z to listen to another human being, to connect with another human being, to laugh, to cry, to share his dreams. And Joe is there for his friend. He also listens to him cry out. And he answers questions and goes out there to get more information to answer some questions that Z could have had. So those things, the interaction that these two men have, especially at meal times, bring sanity, maintain sanity to Z. Z realizes that yes, the enemy could be out there looking for him, but there's somebody who cares, somebody who is willing to see him live there in the cave and remain safe without snitching on him, without telling anybody. And he does that until the end of the madness, until there is amnesty. And he's the one, it is Joe who comes to Z and tells him that, look, an agreement has been reached. You are now free to go home. But because Z was so traumatized, he couldn't believe it. He decided to give himself more time in the cave than risk going out there after having put himself through difficulties such as visiting his wife and going to Joe's homestead on 1 or 2 occasions.
Very nice. So, and again, there's so many lessons here, and what I'm getting from that is that when we go through all of our own personal problems, there's the temptation to let the void take over, right? The vacuum, the emptiness, and what happens? Negativity, stress, thinking about the worst, and you're saying that the solution to our problems is to find some connection with someone, to get our problems out in the open, to have a conversation, to be social, but then also to get some information, right? If you're stressed or if there's some kind of issue that you're facing, then study it, learn about it, just to combat that dark black void of negativity and the despair and all that other bad stuff. And so this book is called 4 Years in a Cave: Surviving Genocide, written by you, Julian Bhebhe, and we can spell out that last name, Bhebhe. And so what are some next steps here? They heard about the book, they heard about some interesting questions, answers, stories. If someone wants to find out about the book as well as anything else, what is the call to action here? What should someone do after listening to our conversation?
Right. They can purchase the book, can find the book from Amazon. There is Kindle. There are various forms. There are various formats that are available for this book. There is the Kindle, the paperback. There is the hardcover, and then there is the audiobook. The audiobook can also be obtained from iTunes. Right. So they can also go to my website with the same title, 4 Years in a Cave. 4 years in a cave, and order it from there.
Excellent. So many formats, whatever is your preferred way of taking in the information. And it seems like a wonderful story, right? Something that needs attention, and then we can also kind of go through it with Z and also get our own insights and really make us think and go through the emotions. And it seems like a fun read. That is 4 Years in a Cave, Surviving Genocide by Julian Bhebhe. And as we wrap up our conversation here, Julian, it's always fun to get like one final quote or lesson, right? One final little soundbite. So, does anything come to mind as far as just a one final bite-sized piece of advice for us?
Yes. Tribalism is a bad thing. Tribalism can create unnecessary death, unnecessary pain. And the differences that these two tribes that we spoke about when we started off have actually created problems for the citizenry there. It is not the majority tribe that seems to be enjoying life. The people from the majority tribe are suffering as much as people from the minority tribe. The only people that seem to be doing okay are those who are in charge. So the lesson right here is get your system, clean up your system, and stop fighting each other. It is not the minority tribe that is a threat to the majority tribe. It is not the majority tribe that is a problem to the minority tribe. It is some people who want to make it that way. And those are the people that must be confronted. The ordinary people from both tribes are suffering. So there must be a way to end this suffering. Z is alive, suffering like anybody else from the majority tribe. So what was the point of butchering people like that? Who benefited other than them who are, who are putting the wedge between the two tribes? So people must open up their eyes and rise above petty differences like that and learn to work together. But that would mean challenging the status quo to some extent so that things can improve and people learn to work together rather than killing each other for reasons that don't seem to make any sense. It's just there must be a way to end madness. And like we saw earlier on, when young soldiers are allowed to do as they please, where there's no control, where there's no guidance, we're bound to have this anarchy. So there must be order so that people can get together and improve their quality of life. And the other thing I would like to add is that, yes, our leaders can cause problems. We know that. But we need to be open-minded too. And trust in this higher power to change things. Not only fold our hands and trust, but do something to end confusion and madness. Z might have looked impulsive. It might have made poor decisions here and there. It might look so to us, but this is a man who was looking for meaning. And we can do stuff to find meaning. Yes, We will mess up here and there, but let's look for order. Let's look for direction and stop fighting each other. Thank you.
Very helpful, very inspiring, and thank you, Julian. It is our duty to make sense out of what has previously been senseless, and to do the hard thing and do the right thing. So you can find out about Z's story and about everything that happened in this book, 4 Years in a Cave: Surviving Genocide by Julian Bhebhe. Wonderful speaking with you, Julian.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for having me on.